Through the Axiom Mission 3, they have reignited Sweden's excitement for space exploration, reminding us of our shared future among the stars. They serve as role models to children and adolescents, inspiring them to explore and shape our future in space.
Ja, det där var Astronomisk Ungdoms Niklas Engelhardt Önne som delade ut medaljer till Axiom Space AX3-besättning när de besökte Sverige i slutet av augusti. Och de hade såklart ett fullspäckat schema där de förutom det där obligatoriska mötet med statsministern besökte Saab, Linköpings universitet, KTH och alltså Astronomisk Ungdom här i Stockholm.
Japp. Och jag fick den stora äran att moderera det samtalet på AU, vilket ni ska få ta del av alldeles om en liten stund. Jag heter Marcus Pettersson.
Jag heter Susanna Levenhaupt.
Och du lyssnar på Har vi åkt till Mars än?
Axiom Space AX3 var alltså den mission som vår svenska astronaut Marcus Wandt gjorde tillsammans med Michael López-Alegría, Villadei och Alper Gezeravcı i januari i år.
Gemensamt för de här 4 är att de alla är piloter i grunden. Så när Marcus bjöd hit dem till Sverige var ett besök på Saab för att kolla på Gripen givet. Och när de var där så passade vi på att ta oss ett snack med dem.
Så innan vi reser vidare till gamla observatoriet och Astronomisk Ungdom i Stockholm så beger vi oss alltså till staden där idéer blir verklighet, Linköping.
Yes! Och även om de tillsammans pratar över 10 språk så är det ju bara en av dem som pratar svenska. Så nu får vi fila på engelskan. Marcus, what have you and the crew been up to since you arrived in Sweden?
Yesterday we got to see a bit of Swedish aviation history at the Air Force Museum here. And then today we've been at Saab looking at how we do aerospace, how aerospace industry is working here and how we do innovation. And also we've been flying a little bit in the simulator, right?
Okay, and you've all flown planes before, so what's the difference between this and the kind of flying you've been doing earlier?
I have never been in a simulator, I'll say that modern, that of a tactical airplane. That was pretty exciting for me. I liked watching Alper. He almost made me seasick a few times, but that's typical of Alper.
Well, even though the platform is different, aviation is always universal. So feeling yourself back in the air, having the same freedom, it's an amazing feeling. But congratulations to Saab for this new platform that they came up with, and I really enjoyed the feeling.
Well, I would say comparing with the last simulations and simulators we used, the Dragon, at least over here you can put the hands on the stick and doing something, while the Dragon is more like a system engineers. But it's definitely a nice experience to fly with Saab and the Gripen E.
Yeah, exactly. In the Dragon, there are not a lot of hands-on things to do. So when you do a simulation for the Dragon, what do? Just sit and watch?
Well, actually, it's not just a sit and watch. You have a sit and watch and understand what's going on, and of course, be ready to engage with the systems if there's something which is not going as expected. And you have a lot of interaction with the ground. So it's more like being a part of a wider team, while when you fly a fighter jets, you are more alone. Of course, you are in a mission. It's a kind of different approach, but I will leave the commander to expand on that.
You know, I noticed there are some things that we do in the Dragon that are important and that are sometimes time critical, but the workload on a second-by-second basis flying an airplane, especially if you're trying to employ it tactically, is much higher. So I think, you know, maybe in some ways the consequences are greater in a spacecraft, but I think the pace of information flow to you is more manageable.
Except for being a fighter pilot, what is the best way to prepare for going to space?
Actually, flying is a pretty small piece of it, to be honest. This is a luxury on this crew because everybody was a military aviator, but on a prior mission that I had, None of them were at the time aviators, and I think that it prepares you with a certain way of critical thinking and sort of prioritization of tasks. But in general, what we do on a space flight is very different from flying. It's much more about following procedures, of course, being ready to react in an emergency situation, working well as a team. But it's not really comparable to an aviation environment. Marcus, would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. It's a lot about teamwork and the work allocation, and also have a backup plan for that teamwork if things would be different. I guess that's where maybe the common ground with being a pilot is that you're used to following procedures maybe, and you're also used to thinking what if, and I think those are common. But then there are so many differences as well.
Now, you are all part of the future of space, going on a private mission with Axiom. And Michael, you've been flying a lot, 6 times in space since 1995. What are the biggest changes since you started flying?
A lot has changed. I mean, I started flying in the space shuttle, which is a very manual spacecraft, something like 1,000 switches in the cockpit, and everything we did, with our hands on our stick or switches or whatever happened to be. I think now things are more modern. For example, for the first time in my career, we used iPads to run our procedures. I mean, obviously that was a twinkle in somebody's eye back in 1995 for my first mission. So I think the art of space flying has changed quite a bit. And more importantly, these astronauts represent a whole new chapter in human spaceflight. So whereas before everybody was a national astronaut and that was their career, in most of these cases, even though Walter has spent quite a number of years training as a cosmonaut/astronaut, they will go back to their so-called day jobs afterward, and this is a step toward the idea of making space accessible to more and more people.
And for the rest of you, what did Michael bring with him to help you train for this mission?
The knowledge doesn't always come from the written sources. Sometimes it stems from the experiences, and he has a great amount of experience coming out of different platforms and different shapes of space experience and space flight experience throughout the years. So he has been really generous to share not only the knowledge that is already written on the documents to understand for us to digest, but also the experience that he has accumulated all these years long. So we are really grateful in that manner.
Yeah, and it's a real luxury to have it's not maybe that's not obvious, but to have someone that is so experienced, like one of the world's most experienced from spaceflight, at an arm's range during a whole mission training spin up and during the whole mission and afterwards as well. It's just a big source, a big wealth of knowledge that you can just ask and get answers from. It's great, and have good discussions with it as well, with new things. So that's great.
Well, I would just add that especially about living on the ISS, which is a completely different environment. We've been for quite an extensive long period of time during the Dragon, 37 hours in the uphill and 47 in downhill, but then 14 days on 18 days actually on the ISS. So even get some tips on how to do easy things on the ISS, that was very important for all of us.
That is also important during the training, as you said, Alper. Some things are written and some things are in the syllabus, but actually most of the training to go to space is being done by very knowledgeable, but still instructors that have not come to space. And then you need that little glue to glue all those pieces together, and that you can get that from Mike, so that's great.
Okay, so looking to the future, the ISS is getting quite old, and hopefully we're getting a new one soon with the help of Axiom. What improvements would you like to see in a new space station?
A proper coffee machine.
Yeah, it's a pretty long list. I think we've learned a lot with the ISS. It was, built in the 90s, and really some of the design was in the 80s, and so it's fairly antiquated, and there are a lot of improvements that actually this crew gave to Axiom for its design of its future space station. But there's a lot that we can learn about the man-machine interface, and certainly the miniaturization of equipment to have a lot of the things that are today external on the truss, that if something breaks, you have to go do a spacewalk to fix it. in the future we'll open a closet and change a box out, and it'll be a lot simple. So it's a long list of things, but that's the advance of technology. That's the normal process, I think.
Okay, and finally, if you got to choose your next mission, where would you go? The ISS, the Moon, or Mars?
Moon.
Yeah, Moon first.
Moon.
Well, if I have choice of Mars, why not?
Why the Moon?
Yeah, I mean, I think the practical considerations today is that a trip to Mars is a much heavier lift, and I'm just not as confident that we'll get there soon enough for me. So that's why I picked. I think the Moon is in reach. I think the Mars is a little bit of a stretch.
Also, if you go to the Moon, you can go there to be for a mission, come back. If you go to Mars, I would like to bring my families along, right? So
They would love that.
yeah, they would love that.
Ja, alltså här får vi förtydliga. Michael säger inte att vi inte kommer åka till Mars. Han tror bara inte att Marsresan kommer att bli av tillräckligt snart för att han ska hinna med.
Men alltså, det tror jag. Finns det någon coolare än Michael López-Alegría?
Nej.
Alltså, han måste ju vara den närmaste framtiden man kan komma, som flyger raketer for a living. Han har varit i rymden 6 gånger, flugit med rymdfärjan, Sojuzen, Falcon, gjort 10 rymdpromenader och är alltså nu commander på Axiom Space.
Och en annan cool grej är att i framtiden kommer vi ju bara att se fler och fler astronauter av det här slaget. Folk som liksom har det som jobb att flyga runt på olika missioner mellan månbaser och rymdstationer och en och annan asteroid.
Ja, och Mars! I alla fall, detta var ju en ganska kort intervju under ett späckat program i Linköping. Men som tur är så fick jag ju träffa dem igen dagen efter för att moderera ett samtal med dem hos Astronomisk Ungdom. Och då fick jag också chansen att komma tillbaka och utveckla flera av frågorna.
Och det här samtalet är alltså inspelat inför publik och inte i vår vanliga studio. Därför låter det som det gör. Men innehållet är precis lika intressant och spännande som vanligt.
Ja visst, och de har ju liknande men ändå olika bakgrunder. Så vi börjar med att låta var och en av astronauterna presentera sig, tycker jag. Så går vi över till frågorna efter det.
Så gör vi. Och vi börjar med allas vår Marcus Wandt som får berätta om sin resa från värnplikten till rymden.
I'll start from when I joined the forces, I guess, as a conscript, and then I'll go back further when we talk about space. So I did my conscription in the army as an airborne ranger, and when I did that, just before I went into that system, about half of everyone in Sweden, or all males in Sweden at that time, did the conscription. And I was leaning towards studying engineering and just skipped the whole thing. But then I went to the mönstringen and saw a picture and it just looked nice out in the woods. So I figured, okay, let's do that. So I did that, came out, and out of that went to Chalmers to study to become an engineer. And during that I went back during winters and worked as a survival instructor because I liked the operational environment and the teamwork and a little bit of what you were saying, working as a team and having people to talk with, and that was great. So I applied for the Air Force because I figured I could get some tech, which I was interested in, and also the kind of community or operational environment as a fighter pilot. So I did that for 10 years and worked with some development and some when deployed to Libya as well and came back home. And then then Sweden decided to build a new jet, a new Gripen. And the engineering part of it had never left. So I was super interested in engineering. I want to combine engineering and flying. So that's why I applied to test pilot school and went to US for US Navy test pilot school. Came back to Sweden and worked with developing the Gripen for 10 years. And then ESA looking for astronauts. And then that space thing came back. So the space thing, when I'm thinking back, I get the question a lot. Did you always dream to be an astronaut? I dreamt about a lot of things. Probably astronaut, carpenter, truck driver, pilots probably, I don't know, and a lot of things. But I remember clearly looking up and seeing the sky and the stars and thinking about how big is space and asking my parents as well, where does it end? No, it's infinite. Oh, infinite, what? And that's kind of hard to grasp, right? So, no, it's got to end. But then my dad said, yeah, so what's behind the end then? And then that discussion started to grow, right? And I don't know. I don't think I had a lot of friends to discuss that with, actually. Maybe I did, and maybe it stopped. And no, let's just build a treehouse instead. It's okay, which is also fun, right? But still. So I think that's a really nice thing that you have, where you can go and have those discussions and have those thoughts and keep those dreams and just, and as you say, don't let them fade away, because that's super important. Otherwise, we would not have gone there if people would have let their dreams fade away.
Hello again, dear friends. Alper Gezeravcı from Turkey. I'm really pleased and honored to be here in front of you. I grew up in a very small town in Turkey, and I joined the military high school when I was 14 years old. And then to the Air Force Academy when I was 18. I graduated from the Turkish Air Force Academy when I was 22. Completed the flight school, and then I was selected to be an F-16 pilot, served in the Air Force for some years, and then made it to the States for my master degree program in 2006 in Air Force Institute of Technology. Returned back 2 years later, continued to fly in F-16, and then switched over to another military aircraft, which is a tanker aircraft, KC-135. Completed its training in the United States, returned back and started to serve in that aircraft. And then in 2013, I switched over to the airlines. And then in 2020, I returned back to the Air Force based on the need of the Air Force and started to fly in both aircraft, KC-135 and F-16. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the night in 2022, May the 23rd, I returned back from an operational flight, and I opened the TV and heard the news. The president was talking on the news, and he was telling they decided to send the very first Turkish citizen into the space. I was very happy because ever since I was 5 years old, I had dreams, as all of you have. But my dreams were always limited with the sky that I could see with my bare eyes and with the airplanes that flying. That was the limit of my dreams. Why? Because your fate is being shaped in where you were born. And at that time, our dreams were limited with the sky. And in the morning when I heard the same news, I decided to go ahead and check for the criteria. It was about 3.5 page long criteria list. I was expecting I was gonna lose one of the items while reading through and then say good luck to the, citizens of Turkey. So at the end of almost 3 weeks, after searching through all the open sources that you can also reach out, I was just determined, and I found out that, yes, I could really provide what is needed in the name of my country. And after applying for the program, there's another interesting criteria. Even though we have done it for the first time in our history, 36,000 Turkish people applied for the program in our history. And then it took about a year. At the end of the selection process, here we are.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Walter Villadei, born and raised in Rome. As my colleagues at the end of the high school, I joined the Air Force. I studied as a space engineering. I had the opportunity to become the first space engineer. Back at the time in the Air Force, we didn't have a space program. And the university that I was attending just opened up the first course in space engineer. I applied and I asked, can I do that? And of course, the answer was, no, you can't. Why? Because it's never done before. That's not a good answer. So I had to push a little bit the system, to stress a little bit the system, but then they realized and they allowed me to do that. Again, there was no any space program, so I was assigned after the academy to my squadron. I flew with some airplanes back in some operational theaters like Afghanistan and Iraq as a flight engineers. And then around 2000, the Air Force started to get back to space program. In Italy, we launched our first satellites in 1964.
and it was thanks to a cooperation between the Italian Air Force and the University of Rome. So again, universities, armed forces, it's a good combination. So the Air Force came back to this stage of space, and I was asked to come back to the Air Staff and to support the building up of the space program in the Air Force. I did it. And then around 2010, the Air Force and the Italian Space Agency, they signed an agreement to even allow, some national astronauts to use some space flights. So we already had some colleagues, pilots, flown to space. So the Air Force was looking for different profiles, and I raised my hand. So I was selected for starting the training, and I was sent to Star City in Russia. So my first approach with space was go to Star City. So I had my basic training course as a cosmonaut. Maybe I'm one of the few Europeans qualified as a cosmonaut. And then I've been in training for many years. So another point is some of my colleagues who were so lucky to move from the selection to the flight in less than 2 years. I've been waiting for more than 10 years. I've been back and forth from Star City for training and supporting the Italian space strategy. And then I was very close to be assigned to flying with the Russians in the Soyuz. But then the geopolitical situation turned to be a little bit more tense. And so I was asked to come back, and we turned to the US because SpaceX, as you know, in May 2020, came back to be full autonomous, and they provided the Dragon. So I went to Axiom and NASA in September 21 for starting my professional training as astronaut. I had the opportunity to fly suborbitally with Virgin Galactic in June 2023. So I was the commander of the Italian team with other colleagues from Virgin Galactic, and we took a lot of payloads on board. And then over that time, I was in training with this fine gentleman, and we flew to the ISS in January this year. So that's my story.
My name is Michael López-Alegría. Maybe you can tell by my last name, I'm not American by birth. I was born in Spain, but we moved to the U.S. when I was quite young, and so I grew up between Boston and most of it in Southern California. I went to school not knowing exactly what I wanted to do. My father was a military officer in the Spanish Army, and I think it was because of him, but catalogs from the U.S. Naval Academy started showing up in my mailbox. I applied somehow, I was accepted, and during the 4 years there, at the end, you have to pick, you give them the preference that you want, and then they pick for you your service selection. Generally, you can be a submarine officer, a surface warfare officer, an aviator, or a Marine Corps. And I was pretty sure I wanted to be a submariner. And then I spent 3 days on a submarine, and I wanted to be an aviator. So I went to flight school, and a little bit like Marcus, I had studied engineering at the academy, and I wanted to combine that with aviation, and so I applied to the same Naval Test Pilot School. And after being a test pilot, I applied to NASA to become an astronaut. And then about 3 years after selection, I flew my first mission, which was on Columbia. It was a 14-day microgravity research mission. The next two missions were on Discovery and Endeavour, and they were both assembly missions to the International Space Station. And then my fourth and final mission at NASA was also on the Soyuz, and it's a three-person vehicle, so there's a Russian commander, I was a flight engineer, and then the third person was a spaceflight participant. So this is somebody who was not a professional astronaut, who effectively paid money to go to space. So after that mission was 7 months long, I came back, stayed at NASA for a few more years, but I left there after 20 years, pretty content with my four-mission career. But the job I went to was to be an advocate for the commercial space industry because of this experience with the spaceflight participant. So after that, I started consulting outside of that organization, and one of my clients was a company called Axiom Space. This was a job where I could help a company build a commercial space station because that's what we're about. We thought of the idea of organizing and conducting private astronaut missions, and the SpaceX was already successful, on the doorstep of being successful. That's a four-person cockpit. So we went out to try to talk to individuals, governments, research agencies, but it was very expensive to fly because the cost of launch, unfortunately, is still very high. And we wanted to sell all 4 seats, but we started talking to our customers, and they really wanted somebody who had been there before. And when we looked around the room to see if flown in space before, it was just me. So I was fortunate enough to command the first all-private mission to the ISS in 2022. That was AX-1. We have since flown a second one in 2023. That was AX-2. And then, of course, we flew AX-3 just earlier this year. And we have another mission, AX-4, scheduled for sometime in the first or second quarter of next year. And I think we did, as a crew, I would say, much better than AX-2, who did much better than AX-1, and will probably be surpassed by AX-4 if things are going in the right direction.
Spännande! Och nu när vi har fått lära oss lite mer om var astronauterna kommer ifrån så är det dags för frågestund. Och frågorna är insamlade från de deltagande ungdomarna i publiken. Och den första frågan går till Walter Villadei som ju började sin träning i ryska Roskosmos och därmed från början är kosmonaut.
Walter, what's the difference between training to become a cosmonaut and training to become an astronaut?
Well, actually, there are not such big differences because the community is pretty small. And to say that the International Space Station has been and still is a magnificent program of international cooperation. They put together two different worlds, the former Soviet Union with the United States and the Western countries. So over the time, I'm pretty sure that at the beginning, maybe the training was slightly different. Still, even during my training, I noticed after the training in NASA that the approach for some things is quite different, but nevertheless are much more the communalities. The needs, because we are flying all together in the same infrastructures, which is the space station, the need to fly together. So for the most, all the crews are a mixed crew. So we have Americans and Russians and internationals. So you have to be able to speak the same operational language along with the normal same English-Russian language. And then you are supposed to leave for 6 months. In our case, it was a short mission, but for the most, my training was started as being able to fly for long expeditions. That means you have to learn, all of us, the same basics to then live and operate together safely and even to enjoy the time. Because if you stay 6 months in a place, as Mike was saying, with someone that you don't feel like belong to you, it's going to be pretty difficult. So, of course, the environment is completely different. Star City is not Houston. And so, especially during the winter time. But I would say that even at the summertime, Houston is not Star City. So you have to be flexible and adapt to both the situations. But nevertheless, and I have to say that I guess I was pretty lucky to have the opportunity to have the exposure to both the training systems. So still there are some niche differences in terms of Russians. They want to always know everything about the physics. I like very much. When you are in US, you have to understand very well the procedures. I guess they are very complementary. So I would say the possibility to be trained from both was definitely an added value.
Okay, thank you. And then I got a question for all of you, but I will start with you, Alper. What was it that you found the hardest thing during training before you went to space?
Mask suit transition. There's a specific procedure when you have a fire emergency inside the capsule. You have to put on your mask immediately in order to be able to breathe, keep breathing, and start some procedure steps. And at some point, if you, based on the readings on your sensors and so on, you may need to switch over to your pressure suite. To me, it wasn't really pleasant, but after getting the command of our commander, based on his more than 20 years long experience, I could say that, yes, that was the unpleasant part of the whole training.
I want to add in and just, first of all, agree wholeheartedly that was the most difficult because, I mean, you're really physiologically stressed. So the assumption is a fire, you can put the fire out. In space, fire doesn't propagate very well because, we have convection here where flames look that way because the heat is rising and it's drawing in oxygen. There we have to use diffusion for the oxygen to get there. So I've done some combustion experiments, and the flames grow spherically, and they go out pretty quickly. So the assumption is we can put the fire out. We have different ways of doing that. But now you've got these combustion products in the atmosphere that are toxic, and you don't want to expose your eyes or, of course, your lungs to them. So that's why, as Alper said, mask on first thing, and then generally we take readings of how those contaminants, how high they are, and we've got to do one of two things to get rid of them. One is to purge the toxic atmosphere by adding a lot of breathable gas, so it's basically air. And the second, more drastic, in case it's very high, is we have to evacuate the capsule. So we basically go to vacuum. Clearly, you need to be in your spacesuit for both of those things. So we practice this mask to suit transition. And of course, you've got this mask on, and you have to A, hold your breath, and B, close your eyes. And of course, we're helping each other. And that is probably where this crew really excelled, because, you know, everybody here is a military aviator, and I think that implants a certain operational way of thinking. And we gelled, I would say, very quickly in this thing. I think even the SpaceX trainers who had trained many NASA crews were impressed with how quickly and how effectively we were able to do that exercise. But I have to agree with Alper, that was the least favorite part.
Also, so one component also in that is when you have this mask on, the oxygen flow is pretty low to that mask. So with the mask on, and you're doing pretty hard work when you're doing this transition, or the other things we have to do to put out the fire. And then when you put your suit on, which is also physically demanding, the flow in the suit is also low. So not only are you working really hard and doing these transitions and closing your eyes and getting in there, but it's also very low in oxygen. So you're quite hypoxic actually, and that's So it's not that's a tough one.
And the other physiological thing is you're generally building up a heat load, and so you get condensation on the inside of the mask, so you're not seeing very well, and it's pretty loud, and because these masks, like you're basically blowing oxygen or air overboard, and so you can't hear each other very well, you can't see very well, you're hypoxic. It's super fun.
So then you had a lot of training, not everything was that fun, but was there parts of the training that you enjoyed more than you thought?
The whole going to the bathroom thing is very emphasized at NASA, like train this really well, because it's more difficult in space than on Earth. But it was not as difficult as they made it sound. So that was something that was, I don't know if I want to say funner, but it was less complicated.
The other point, when you are in training in Building 9 at the Johnson Space Center, you follow the procedure, but you, of course, have the gravity. Doing the same procedure and move yourself inside the station in microgravity, that really turns to be much funner than, the simple doing the procedure on the ground. So for the most, everything you do for the first time in microgravity, floating and trying to adapt yourself is definitely, from one side, more difficult than expected, because it's the first time you experience such condition, but at the same time, it's even much more funny.
Being there all by itself is already a good reason to be happy, because you must have all been to playground. Do you call it Luna Park?
Yeah. Gröna Lund is what it is.
Yeah, you are buying tokens. I'm telling to the children in my country and my friends in the country, think about yourself being in this
Gröna Lund.
Yes, this place, and then being given an unlimited token that you can use any moment. Yeah. So it's just like that, amazing. Yeah. You are really busy doing a lot of things according to your schedule, but even in between these activities, which keeps you pretty busy, you need to get something, and you are flying from one point to the other. What is more amazing than that?
Is there something that you wished you had time for to do up there that you didn't do?
EVA?
EVA, yeah. That was not a time issue, but yes.
Yes, not a time issue.
We had planned to be docked to the ISS for 14 days, and because the weather was not cooperating, we ended up having 4 more days. And I think that was a godsend, because invariably first of all, we had a very busy, what we call timeline. So our daily activities are scheduled. And they all had experiments that their countries had provided, and they felt a certain responsibility to do them. And so you don't really have much, I'll say, free time. In fact, you have virtually no free time. On a long mission as an ISS crew member, I worked half a day Saturday, and I had the entire day Sunday off. But as a short duration crew, we basically, I think we had half a day off, maybe. But you've got a lot of things that you're trying to keep up with your friends and family via email, or actually you have a phone, and especially taking pictures, because you really want to get, it's just like you all want to take a selfie or something when you're in this cool environment. Well, imagine, you're flying over the Earth every 90 minutes in a different part, and you want to get your hometown or where you went to school or whatever you did. So all those things end up sort of stacking up, and you don't quite get them all done by the time we were supposed to undock, and I think we had 4 more days, which was really nice to be able to catch up.
Yes, and you had 4 more days. And as we all know, there are a couple of astronauts up there right now who will have a bit more than 4 days extra in space. How do you think they feel, and what would you feel about have to stay in space for another half a year?
Half an hour?
Sorry. More tokens.
Exactly, more free tokens. I think one thing is very important that you mentioned earlier, Mike, the uncertainty of when you're going, because there's been the discussion, right? And now the decision is made. I think that makes a big difference for the astronauts up there to get the date, even though that date is far out, because now they can focus on that, be a part of the crew, and continue. And I think I would probably enjoy it mostly, and of course it would depends a little bit on the family situation or the situation at home, because other people are affected as well, right? But if when you get that date and you know that you're going to be there for half a year more and work, I think that would be fine.
You are mentally and physically fit and ready for any kind of circumstances and contingencies. That already comes as the nature of the job that you are doing, and you are getting prepared all the way from the beginning. So I don't think that's a huge problem for them, other than the people waiting on the ground for them.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is they knew this was a possibility when they launched. It was a test flight, and so NASA knew it ahead of time, so they gave them training to live and work on an ISS for a long duration period of time. The ISS has enough provisions, food, clothing, water, fuel, that kind of thing. And so I think once you get beyond the question of when, I think that becomes secondary, and you just wake up every morning and do your thing and enjoy the view.
Michael, you have a long career in space. How would you describe that it has changed from what it was to the commercial side now?
I mean, in many ways, it's identical. Training and sort of what you do day to day when you're in space. But I will say I feel differently about it because these are my crewmates. They're also my customers. And so my mission is, first and foremost, for it to go well and safely. But I want to support them however I can. Whereas when you're an individual crew member as part of a crew, everybody kind of does their own thing, and you get together at the end of the day maybe and talk about it. But I think there's a different sense when you have not only the successful completion of the mission, but their joy. Turns out with these guys, they didn't have to worry about that too much because the smiles on their faces were pretty big the whole time. But it's a very different approach to how I'm doing my day-to-day work in terms of what I need to focus on. It's kind of like the difference between flying an airplane and teaching somebody to fly an airplane. You are really invested in their success as well. And I think that made a big difference. But again, with these guys, it was pretty easy.
Think about the sequence of the mission, because the debate about what about the commercial space flight is commercial private entities versus the institutional one, the governmental. Look at the Axiom 1, 2, and 3. For the first time, there were astronauts from the Saudi Arabia, the first Turkish astronaut, the second Swedish astronaut. So the possibility, the flexibility to get much larger set of countries involved in space, it's much more flexible and powerful than in the past, where the government are, of course, focused on the next step of the frontier. In this case, we're talking about the moon. But this commercial spaceflight and what they are doing, it was amazing. I mean, even in terms of the potentialities to open up much more international cooperation. So it's a tremendous added value. And then, of course, it's a matter of collaboration. It's a matter of cost. So we all hope to have the possibility, and this is a challenge for you guys, how much we can really reduce the cost to access to space. We need new technologies, new systems, different engineering process. So there's a lot of stake, but if we can really overcome these kind of limits, then really, as Mike was saying at the beginning, the democratization of space will come to be something real.
And how is it to be, for the rest of you, on the customer side? And how would it look in the future?
I think in my case, it was awesome in the way that I came from one of these agencies, traditional agencies, ESA, and was put on into commercial, more customer side in this. So it was two worlds meeting each other in a way that we haven't seen before. And I think that was a very good in flight test. We talk about envelope expansion, where you can operate your vehicle. And so this was a good envelope expansion for ESA, I believe, to where can we operate our space operation? How does that work? And there was a lot of interesting challenges in the beginning, actually coming from these two worlds and meeting them, and which is something that I normally enjoy because there opens up all these possibilities. And I think the attitude that Axiom had and that ESA had made this a very fruitful collaboration, which is still ongoing. X4 also has an ESA astronaut in there. And I just want to mention, since we're in Sweden, that this would not have happened without that decisive, the Sweden's extremely fast way of aligning and deciding and helping to push ESA over this into this world. That was awesome.
In our case, I'm not the first one. I'm the 8th Italian astronaut. So we've been a long history of people flying to space through the collaboration with ESA and the governmental. But for the first time, and I don't consider myself nor the Air Force a customer, but more partner with Axiom, we had the opportunity to run for the first time a mission as Italian Air Force. And we did this taking aboard the Italian Space Agency, who took care about the experiments. And for the first time, we had industries developing their own payloads and experiments and asking the Air Force in collaboration to provide the support of the subject matter expert, that is, in this case was the astronaut flying to the ISS. So it's really a game changer in terms of mindset and perspectives, and really it's opened up multiple opportunities, even including for these young women and men in the room, for instance, for conceiving new experiments and making these experiments flying faster and hopefully cheaper in the future to space. So it's really a game changer.
Vilket gäng, va? De känns så sammansvetsade och välkastade i sina roller liksom.
Ja, alltså de är ju verkligen ett riktigt dream team. Och Michael var ju inne på det här att AX4 antagligen kommer lyckas ännu bättre. Så den resan ser vi verkligen fram emot. Uppskjutningen sker i början av nästa år och självklart kommer vi att följa Axiom och AX4 hela vägen.
Hur som helst, så kul att få höra det här samtalet. Vi som inte hade möjlighet att närvara på plats. Och alltid lika roligt att höra Marcus Wandts positiva stämma såklart.
Ja, och speciellt glad blir han, förutom när han får åka till rymden då, när han får ta emot medaljer. Som ni hörde i början av detta avsnittet så bjöds det på medaljutdelning under besöket hos AU. Och hela utdelningen, ja hela samtalet och AUs hela presentation faktiskt, finns också filmad. Så den hittar ni på vår hemsida, harviåktillmarsen.se. Där hittar ni såklart också alla våra andra avsnitt av serien.
Där och i våra sociala medier hittar ni också information om den här veckans tävling. Det är så kul att lotta ut priser till lyckliga vinnare, så det fortsätter vi med.
Och på hemsidan hittar ni också all vår musik. Den är skriven av Armin Pendek.
Jag heter Susanna Levenhaupt.
Jag heter Marcus Pettersson.
Har vi åkt till Marsen görs på Beppo av Rundfunk Media i samarbete med Saab.
Hallå? Programmet gjordes av Rundfunk Media.